There is a way of moving through life that feels urgent, even when nothing is immediately wrong. Days are handled, not lived. Tasks are completed, not chosen. Attention stays narrow, focused on what needs to be done next. The body keeps going, the mind stays alert, and rest feels like something to earn later. This isn't panic, it's endurance. People who feel like they're living in survival mode rarely describe themselves as distressed. They describe themselves as managing, getting through, holding things together. There's a quiet efficiency to it. Problems are addressed quickly. Emotions are postponed. The priority is stability, keeping everything from tipping over. In everyday life, this shows up as constant readiness, thinking a few steps ahead, preparing for setbacks that may never come, avoiding unnecessary risks. Even good moments are scanned for what could go wrong next. Enjoyment exists, but it's partial. The system never fully stands down. Because this mode often develops in response to real pressure, it feels justified. At some point, staying alert was necessary. The environment demanded it. But over time, the posture remains, even after the threat changes. Survival becomes the default, not the response. And beneath that constant effort, a quiet question begins to form. Not, why am I like this? But when did living start to feel like something I have to endure? This survival posture doesn't usually come from one dramatic event. It forms gradually, through accumulation. Responsibilities stack, uncertainty lingers, emotional demands increase. At some point, the system learns that staying alert is safer than relaxing. Attention narrows not because of fear, but because focus feels necessary to keep things from slipping. From a psychological perspective, survival mode is a state of chronic prioritization. The mind filters everything through usefulness and risk. What helps, what threatens, what can wait. Emotional processing is deferred. Reflection is postponed. The system isn't avoiding life, it's managing load, and management becomes constant. Behaviorally, this shows up as efficiency without ease. Decisions are made quickly, but rarely revisited. There's little room for curiosity or exploration. Choices are practical, not expressive. The person does what works, not what resonates. Even rest is strategic, taken only when absolutely needed, never freely. Over time, this narrows the internal world. The focus on stability reduces access to play, imagination, and long-term vision. The future is approached cautiously, not because hope is absent, but because hope feels like a luxury. Survival mode keeps things functioning, but it quietly delays living. And slowly, what once felt temporary starts to feel permanent. There is a moment when this survival mode becomes most noticeable. It appears during pauses. When nothing urgent is happening, when the schedule briefly opens, instead of relief, a subtle discomfort emerges. The mind looks for the next task, the body stays tense. Stillness feels unearned, almost suspicious, as if something important should be happening. From a behavioral perspective, this happens because the nervous system has learned to associate calm with vulnerability. When life once demanded constant response, lowering alertness carried risk. Over time, that association stayed. Even when circumstances improve, the system continues to scan. Relaxation feels incomplete, as though it might allow something to slip. Psychologically, this creates a state where presence is difficult to sustain. The person is always slightly ahead of the moment, anticipating what's next. Enjoyment is interrupted by planning. Reflection is interrupted by responsibility. The mind rarely settles where the body is. Attention stays forward-facing, guarding against disruption. This is when survival mode stops being about survival and starts being about habit. The original pressure may be gone, but the posture remains. The system doesn't ask whether alertness is still needed, it assumes it is. And because nothing visibly breaks, the state continues unnoticed. The quiet cost of this becomes clearer here. Life feels busy but thin. Days are full yet rarely satisfying. Not because nothing good happens, but because the system never fully allows itself to arrive. As this pattern settles, it begins to shape emotional expectations around connection. The person doesn't anticipate conflict or rejection, they anticipate effort. Being with others starts to feel like something that requires preparation, recovery, and careful pacing. Even positive interactions are filtered through the question of capacity. Do I have the energy for this right now? From a psychological perspective, this happens when self-regulation quietly replaces engagement. The system learns to prioritize internal stability over relational presence. Distance becomes the easiest way to stay balanced, not because relationships are unsafe, but because they now feel demanding in ways they didn't before. Emotionally, this creates a soft detachment. Care remains intact, but expression thins. Warmth is felt, but offered selectively. The person is not cold, they are cautious. Connection is approached gently, sometimes hesitantly, as if it could tip the internal balance. Nothing dramatic signals this shift. There is no rupture, no explicit boundary drawn. The person simply becomes less available over time.
And because availability fades gradually, it rarely feels like a loss in the moment. It feels like adaptation, like learning how to move through life with less friction. Yet beneath that adaptation, something subtle changes. Closeness becomes optional, and distance becomes the default. Over time, living in survival mode begins to shape identity.
The person may start to see themselves as resilient, practical, or strong under pressure. These traits feel earned. They explain how things were handled. They justify the endurance. And they make constant alertness feel like a personal quality rather than a temporary state. Psychologically, identity built around survival is stable but rigid. The self is organized around coping, not around choice. Strength becomes the ability to endure rather than the ability to expand. The system learns to trust effort more than ease, vigilance more than curiosity. Anything that threatens efficiency feels unnecessary or even irresponsible. Behaviorally, this shows up as difficulty slowing down even when it's possible. Opportunities for rest are minimized. Moments of safety are used to prepare for future strain. The person may feel uncomfortable when things are calm, as if calm is something that must be used productively before it disappears. Over time, this creates a quiet narrowing of life. There is competence, but little softness. Reliability, but limited joy. The person survives very well, yet something essential feels postponed. Not lost, but waiting. Waiting for a moment when survival is no longer required. And slowly, a deeper question forms beneath the endurance. If everything is stable now, why does it still feel like I'm bracing for impact? The most important shift begins when survival mode is no longer seen as reality, but as residue. Not a reflection of the present moment, but of a system that stayed activated for too long. At some point, endurance was necessary. The alertness made sense. The problem isn't that the system learned to survive, it's that it never received a clear signal that survival was no longer required. When this is recognized, the experience changes subtly. Living in survival mode stops feeling like a personality and starts feeling like a state, something the body is doing, not something the self is. This distinction matters. States can shift. Identities feel permanent. Psychologically, moving out of survival doesn't begin with relaxation or optimism. It begins with permission. Permission to notice when urgency appears without cause, when effort continues without demand, when vigilance remains even in safety. Awareness doesn't turn the system off, but it interrupts the assumption that everything is still at risk. There is often resistance here. Slowing down can feel unsafe. Letting the guard drop may trigger discomfort before relief. The system has learned that readiness equals protection. Releasing that belief takes time. It may be worth observing when survival mode activates most strongly, what it's protecting against, what it expects would happen if alertness stopped. In many cases, the difficulty isn't leaving survival mode, it's trusting that the danger it was built for has already passed. Here, these patterns are observed calmly.